Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Altitude. I'm Woody Woodworth. Very excited about today's show. We have many cool topics to discuss, focusing on what multi-cloud is like and cloud connectivity is like in the European theater. And joining us on the show today to help with these topics is a fantastic guest, Elmar Wesle, who recently joined Aviatrix as a senior solution engineer. So Elmar, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join this episode of Altitude.
Absolutely. I have to say, I love your background. It is super cool. I wish I had a garage that looked like that. That is awesome.
It's actually not a garage. This is my office,
Oh,
which doubles up as a electronic workbench in the background because that's my hobby when I'm not doing Aviatrix stuff.
oh, that is cool. So do you work with all kinds of electronics, or is it mostly integrated circuits and stuff?
It's all kind of electronics. I studied that like 30 to 40 years ago. My professional career started with electronics as a hardware and software developer, and I still didn't lose contact to these topics. So I repair stuff, I build stuff, home automation, all kind of interesting things.
That's a fantastic hobby. I wish I had more time in my life to pursue something like that. My hobbies these days include driving around the country in this giant RV, which my
Oh,
kids love, and that is a lot of fun. But it is also a lot of work because RVs are these. Basically, I have a motorhome, so it's like a house on wheels. So anything that could go wrong with a house will inevitably go wrong with an RV because it's a house that goes, 70 miles an hour down the road and bounces around. I'm constantly in there fixing plumbing and fixing gears that run the slide outs. And, so there is definitely a mechanical bend to that, but it's a labor of love. I think anyone that likes to do RVing knows that you're constantly tinkering on your rig.
I've seen these things in America. However, I think these would not work in Germany. The roads are just too curvy and too narrow for these.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in Europe, I think they're called caravans, and I think they're much smaller and more
Yeah,
compact, right? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I agree. The big ones that you see here in the States would certainly not work. People would get them stuck or run them off the road or something. It's
yeah,
kind of a uniquely American experience.
yeah.
Oh, United States or North American experience, I should say. So, Elmar, you come to Aviatrix with a wealth of knowledge and experience doing cloud connectivity. You've had previous roles working for network service providers in their cloud division, doing private and public connectivity to cloud. So I'd like to drill into that a little bit on today's episode. Did you notice over your tenure in this industry that customers were connecting more and more to multiple clouds as opposed to a single cloud?
I definitely see a raise in demand in that department. Enterprise customers already are connected to more than one cloud. That's like an historical fact. Especially in Germany, a lot of the enterprise companies use Azure and AWS. But I would not say it is happening in a multi-cloud way. It is more like they have these isolated connections to AWS and to Azure. That is different from a multi-cloud environment. I would say a multi-cloud environment is something where you have connections not only to the cloud, but also in between. As I said, the enterprise companies have that already partially, but not in the full mesh. But they are also on the way to increase their connectivity there and to mesh it more interconnect way. And in addition to that, the corporate customers also are on the way to use more than one cloud provider. A lot of my customers in the past have used mostly just one service provider. In Germany, it was mostly Azure, but now a lot of these customers approach me and tell me that they want to add another or cloud provider. And in this case, it's mostly AWS. In some cases, also Google Cloud Services or OCI, but in most cases, the second provider that they are asking for is AWS.
That's interesting. Two questions. Why do you think, Azure is the most popular cloud in Germany? And secondly, what factors are driving businesses to diversify and seek out other clouds, for example, AWS, and add that into the mix?
Azure being the predominant provider in Germany, I think that has got to do with the long history in Germany and the engagement of Microsoft. I think they were supporting customers longer than AWS. That most of the enterprise customers have a long history with Microsoft from the old days, a lot of on-premise stuff. And then the logical step for them when they thought about cloud was to go that way with Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
AWS only came onto the market later, but they are catching up. Worldwide scene, AWS has more customers and more cloud resources, but in Germany, it's the other way around.
So speaking about Western Europe in particular, I suppose, which is, the part of the market that you're very experienced in, when customers are looking for expansion into another cloud, what are some factors that are driving those decisions? Are they saying, I just want to protect myself against a regional outage, so it's more of a high availability play? Are they saying there really are these other services in other clouds that I want to use and combine them with services I'm using in my primary cloud? Are they resisting vendor lock-in and saying, if I move some workloads to another cloud, I get better pricing or better competitiveness? Is it a merger and acquisition because businesses are growing, or is it some combination of these things?
It's different with each and every customer. I hear the vendor lock reason quite a lot. A lot of customers are a little bit uncertain what the prices will be in the future, especially with Microsoft. Especially after the background, on the background of the latest VMware and Broadcom development, they are a little bit afraid that they might see the same development with Microsoft. So a lot of these customers then reach out to AWS to have some lever to get a better contract negotiation with Microsoft. I hear that a lot. And the other reasons that you mentioned, I also hear them, like resilience. That is always a topic, especially if a global outage deletes all the services that are in place with one service provider. They struggle. The idea is to have a more resilient environment where if things like that happen, and for example, a central service that is required for all the cloud services would go down, they can switch over to the copy of the services in the other cloud provider.
Right.
That's not something that they really go after full steam right now. It's more like they start thinking about having something like that.
Yeah.
A third reason might be also the reason that other cloud providers have probably a little technical advantage in certain areas. If you look at Google Kubernetes services, these are well asked for in a couple of customers. They see an advantage there compared to AWS or to Azure.
Makes sense. So it sounds very similar then to what's happening here in North America. Sounds like the reasons for diversifying to multiple clouds are really the same. Avoid vendor lock-in, resiliency, get the ability to provision services where they run best, or where one cloud has an edge on a particular type of service or platform versus another. So sounds like the business drivers are pretty much the same. However, I think the connectivity patterns in Europe might be a little different here than in North America. So I'd like to double click into that for a moment. My understanding is that in Europe, there is much more of a propensity or a desire to use the internet as a way to connect both to the cloud and between clouds via SD-WAN versus here in the United States and to some degree Canada. While SD-WAN is certainly in use, it's not nearly as popular. Businesses tend to favor private networks more for a variety of reasons. One, I think, is that they have already built and provisioned large private networks historically, and they simply want to reuse these Another is kind of a mistrust or distrust of the internet in North America as from a security perspective, which is interesting because using encryption, if you're doing it correctly, those concerns shouldn't be too overwhelming. And also a reliability concern where customers in North America are saying, well, I'm not going to get the kind of on-demand scalability and the SLA capability with the internet that a private network could give me. So, I'm guaranteed this kind of bandwidth. I'm guaranteed these kind of numbers if I use MPLS or a similar kind of technology, and then, connect into a middle cloud provider like Equinix or Megaport, and then jump in from there. So what is your take on that? Do you notice a lot more SD-WAN being used in Europe and the internet?
Definitely. That's definitely raising. With some of our conservative customers, they still utilize MPLS mostly and have one or two connections to the cloud. But they already start thinking about moving the WAN connectivity level up to the cloud and using things like the transit gateways or virtual WAN in Azure to replace the MPLS connectivity and the MPLS cloud as such. But I think it's only starting right now for these conservative environments. But if you look at startups and new companies, they use SD-WAN and other internet-based connectivity options right from the beginning. They don't have that kind of anxiety against using the internet as a transport medium.
Yeah. From my perspective, just working with customers, and again, this is just Woody's view of the world. It's not necessarily reflective of broader trends in the industry, but I'm sure you remember Edward Snowden.
Yeah.
He was a security expert and crypto researcher for, I do believe it was the NSA, the National Security Administration. And of course, he blew open this whole discussion and discovery that the government is peering through networks and has access to a lot of secrets and secret keys that allow them to drill into cryptography and see the data they want to see. And that, you believe that your encrypted network is private when in fact it doesn't have to be, or it's not, because the government can kind of come in through a backdoor. That was a real turning point, I think, for US businesses and US customers against using the internet. They became very concerned that the government could force them to divulge customer data, or they could simply use these backdoors to get in and look at customer data through public networks or last mile networks. And so that really drove a lot of customers to seek out private networks where the involvement of the government was less profound or even non-existent, because, they owned the lines. Now, to what degree the government really does this, I don't know. It's all an Edward Snowden kind of conversation, but I think that made also a big difference ultimately in the connectivity patterns we see between the two continents, because perhaps in Europe, that same kind of apparatus isn't there, or customers just simply don't have a fear or concern about that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's right. I think especially in Germany, people trusted government more than they do in other countries. I don't know why, because our government is elected in a very similar way, and it's the same kind of people. But there's more of a trust here. On the other side, people or companies only fear intrusion from competitors or from spies from abroad, and not so much intrusion from the government side. So there's more a demand to protect against competitors or against spies. I think that's the bigger fear here.
Yeah. Has the Russian invasion of Ukraine changed any of the European patterns for security and connectivity in the context of there might be increased cyber warfare from the Russian government against nations that are part of the NATO bloc as a kind of retaliatory motion for supporting Ukraine, right?
It is actually happening.
Yeah.
Not as much as we thought it would happen, So our expectation was much higher, more hacker attacks and more denial of service attacks and what have you. It didn't happen as much as we thought, but I think we haven't seen the end of this. There's more to come. So it's most likely a good idea to increase the security protection and to be able to defend these kind of attacks. Now that we are most certain where they will come from. In the
Right.
past, they could come from everywhere, from Africa, from Russia, from China, and now I think the destination where these attacks will come from is most likely Russia. So we have a better understanding where it's coming from, and we can better protect against these.
So going back to the growth of multi-cloud in Germany and Western Europe, what are some patterns that you saw customers use to be successful insofar as when you onboard another cloud, the business decision makers have really good plans about ultimately, I think, when they crystallize and get their ducks in a row about the advantages of onboarding another cloud and how the
Yeah.
applications will work and the services they want to use. This all kind of rolls downhill to networking and IT. And they say, okay, we've got it figured out in theory. We know how these applications should interact. Or for example, when an application in Azure fails, we want this similar kind of application to be stood up in AWS and converge. Now you do all the networking and make it work. And then the IT people kind of throw their hands up in the air and go, okay, I'll get right on that. Like it's one thing to envision it, and it's another thing to execute it, as you well know.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that businesses are going about actually realizing this connectivity? Are they using, to your point, the cloud provider backbones themselves? So when they want to move traffic between two clouds, are they using a cloud service like Cloud WAN or Virtual WAN in Azure to do so? Are they bringing it down instead of going cloud to cloud, cloud
Yeah.
edge to cloud edge? Are they pulling it down to, say, a colo provider like a Orange Cloud connection or a Equinix or Megaport connection, and then bouncing it back up? Are they backhauling it all the way down to their private network or over SD-WAN and then pulling it back up? Like, what do you see them do?
It's mostly the second scenario that you just described.
Yeah.
Since their management of the different cloud providers is in many cases quite isolated. So there's a team that handles Azure and another team that handles AWS. And in most cases, these teams don't even talk to each other. If a line of business needs to have an application in AWS, they talk to the AWS guys, they set it up, and that's it then. In very few occasions, I saw architectures that allowed the direct connectivity between the cloud tenants, so directly between Azure and AWS. In the cases where when I saw that, that was mostly done with Equinix.
Mm-hmm.
But there's always a rather large demand to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to provisioning applications to the cloud and not be so fixed in the two directions they have. Put one part of the application, the Kubernetes part, into Google, and another part that does probably something else where Microsoft is good at into Azure, and have them being interconnected. That is normally not something people do because it was too complicated to implement.
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of why do people, and for those that are listening, I know we're getting into a very technical discussion. So I'll try to tread lightly here for those that are not propeller heads like Elmar and myself. But there's this network strategy called tromboning, which means you pull the traffic out of one region or cloud or data center and you dip it down or up to a central connectivity hub, in this case, Equinix. And that's where you have your connectivity nerve center. You have your big edge routers that connect multiple things together, and you have a security stack. And then you bend it back up to another location. Thus, the network path looks like a curve. I'm doing this with my finger for the YouTube viewers. Those that are listening on Spotify, for example, will just have to imagine. but the curve of the connectivity looks like a trombone, right? It takes a sloping path down and then back up. So there are some advantages to this. One is that, just like you said, Elmar, you don't have to have a lot of collaboration between specialty teams, because the AWS people can come in, they can connect the AWS side to Equinix or Megaport and say, we're done with that. The routes are open. They're going to work. The Azure team will do the same. And then network and IT handles the central connectivity hub, and the spice flows and things connect. However, in some cases, it's kind of inefficient because you're pulling the data a little further down. It's just that you have to be kind of careful, because your main ways in and out of these big clouds are your private connections from your colos up to the respective clouds. So if there's ever any failure with those, or if you need to maintain them or poke them with the stick, things get really dicey. So it's nice to have alternative paths between clouds as a backup, or for a different kind of load sharing of traffic. So this tromboning pattern has been super, super common. It's the same in North America. And I also noticed the same thing here, that cloud providers tout that they have these massive backbones and these services that capitalize on them, like virtual WAN, for example. But I'm still not seeing that as the predominant pattern for moving traffic around. So my question is, why do you think it is that people still prefer, in addition to the fact that teams don't have to collaborate, they still prefer to pull this traffic down into these colos, as opposed to just enabling cloud-to-cloud connectivity through the respective backbones?
Sometimes it's because they don't have the technology available. Most of these companies just look into the offerings that come with Azure or AWS. And that's Direct Connect, Express Route, these kind of things. None of these cloud providers offers any direct connection to the other cloud provider. So you would need to stay with the cloud native connectivity options, and that would say move down in a trombone way, move over, and then move up again. If they would want to connect it directly on a shorter path, they would need to use VPN, and then they would have bandwidth limitations. And that's something that also out of the question. So if there would be a way to connect these two cloud providers directly with a very high bandwidth, with an encrypted connection, that would be the solution for them.
Right. So here we are dancing around one of the answers, the elephant in the room, which is, of course, Aviatrix provides this kind of capability. So, Aviatrix isn't the only game in town for this, but I think it's one of the most compelling ones. Although, of course, the purpose of this show is to explore multiple industry topics and not necessarily always Aviatrix. But I think if customers used, cloud networking, multi-cloud networking software solutions like Aviatrix, they would find themselves in a much better position. First of all, their two teams don't have to be cloistered away from each other, right? They can be unified by a single connectivity platform, which, obfuscates the complexities and differences. And then they do have a true solution for combining or connecting these two cloud environments together in that high-speed way you mentioned. And they don't have to worry about the complexities of connecting one cloud platform to another and the interoperability between those two. So I think that can help customers diversify the way that they move traffic around between clouds in a multi-cloud arena, for sure. So I don't know if this is true in Europe. In America, it's mostly true based on my experience and deep relationships with middle cloud providers like Equinix and CoLogic. When the cloud providers peer with each other, meaning their public edges are exchanging traffic, there really isn't an internet as such in between, right? So the public edge of one cloud will sit in these big colo providers, and the same with the other. So they might be in slightly different locations in these colos, a different data center or a different rack or a different floor, but fundamentally they're only a hop, skip, and a jump away.
They mostly use public IP addresses for these spaces, but sometimes they are not routed into the internet.
Yeah, I kind of wish there was a better way other than this podcast to kind of get the word out to customers to say, if you connect one side of a cloud using a public IP to another side of a cloud using a public IP, and you encrypt in between, you get some really nice outcomes. First, there's really very limited internet activity going on between those two IPs, meaning that by and large, the CSPs don't dump that traffic off to another network service provider as man in the middle. Most of the time, that's going to be moving through a big cloud exchange or a big, big network provider exchange. The same data centers where you're building your direct connects and your express routes and your cloud connects and stuff. And secondly, it can save a ton of money because you don't have to use different kinds of connectivity schemes to pull that traffic down and out and over. However, it's interesting, the cloud providers kind of know this, right? So the data rates for moving data out of a cloud over a public IP tend to be more expensive than using, the express route and the direct connects. So that's something that I think encourages people to continue tromboning, right?
Might be a reason, yeah. I think for each and every situation, you would need to compare costs. What is the most reasonable way to connect? But tromboning always comes with additional delay and latency. So that's the downside of that, even if it might be slightly less expensive than the direct connection.
Yeah, for sure. Any other customer challenges that you have experience with just dealing with cloud connectivity in general? What are some things that, in your experience, customers struggle with when they try to embrace hybrid connectivity all up or hybrid connectivity in a multi-cloud arena? I mean, we've talked a lot about the reasons why customers want multi-cloud, and we've talked about the existing patterns, and then we've talked about some solutions to simplify these patterns, but I'm sure there's more going on.
One big challenge that they all have, or most of them have, is the network admins. Coming from a very traditional networking thing, they are all very good with their Cisco CLI and everything. But when it comes to cloud networking, they need to let go of a few principles. So they don't have any broadcast anymore, no VLANs anymore. Some of these people really struggle with that. And then there's a challenge when it comes to administrating even more than one cloud provider. That's the second hurdle then. So first they need to get used to the different environment in the cloud and different rules. And the second one is then to do this for more than one cloud provider. And that's a skill challenge, first of all, and also a training challenge. So that they need to really dig into that and get proper training to be able to handle that. And after they are able to handle it, most of the networking guys complain about missing transparency within the cloud. So with their Cisco routers, they would be able to look in each and every table on the router, ARP tables, routing tables, what have you. They can modify and view each and every one of those. But when it comes to cloud, they miss all that. So they don't have much insight into the different cloud native network components. And that's the next problem for them.
I agree. Those challenges sound identical in every way, shape, and form to the same challenges that I notice network engineers and IT folks having here and in North America and in the US. That lack of visibility was especially frustrating to them. And the steps that you needed to take to get to that visibility, sometimes that literally meant having to go through multiple support calls to find the one team that had the rights to log into the control plane in that cloud and look at, say, the interface on a cloud edge router that was being, kind of obfuscated away as, an edge networking surface. And they really wanted to see deep things on that router, like their traffic statistics, the health of the network, how many packets were being dropped on their specific interface, because they were trying to troubleshoot a complex problem. And they were very frustrated that it took them, at least a day or two to even find the team that knew how to get that information. So I think that's just the game that IT is going to have to continue to play with using cloud native services. I mean, the cloud providers are doing amazing things. They are building these gorgeous multi-tenant environments on top of this very sophisticated data center infrastructure. and then exposing, slices of capability and providing a form of kind of isolation. But with that elegance and that ability to have a software kind of scale apparatus, meaning I want to grow and shrink my environment elastically, and I want to build and change things without disturbing my neighbor, comes as a necessary price. This lack of visibility and lack of control, which drives IT people crazy, because I think you could agree that every time there's a problem with an application, the first thing people look at is the network, right? They say, oh, it's probably a network problem. So networking folks are constantly having to defend themselves and say, look, here's all the telemetry, here's all the data that says that in some cases, the network is not to blame. The network is healthy. There's no drops anywhere. There's no timeouts anywhere, this kind of thing.
But at a certain point, their horizon just stops because they are not able to look deeper into everything. So they can tell you, we can say it's working without any issues until to that point. And after that point, the cloud provider is responsible. So we cannot look beyond that point.
That's right. Again, not to turn this episode into too much of a commercial, but of course, Aviatrix and cloud networking software provides a very nice outcome for customers that want to return control and visibility right back to their networking house. To a high degree, because it's an encrypted overlay and you control every piece and component of that overlay, but you do so programmatically so that you're not maintaining hundreds of individual components. You're expressing intent to a controller that does it all for you. But when you need that visibility, it's there. So that was something I'm a big fan of. I think returning that visibility to networking teams and that control end to end is a super important component. And I think as cloud continues to mature, businesses are really going to need that kind of control and visibility to be able to scale and to execute correctly, to move at the speed that they need to move at.
Yeah.
So Elmar, this has been super fascinating. Any other final thoughts that you want to share?
I think there's a long way to go for Germany and Europe on the multi-cloud path. We only just started that, and I think it will be a very interesting journey for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're really just getting started. It's very exciting to think about what the next 5 years and even 10 years are going to bring. I've said this on a previous episode. I think it was with Daniel Gaina, and I positioned that there's going to be a whole new market segment that rises up and is beginning to rise up, that specializes specifically in solutions that are customized for multi-cloud customers. It could be networking, like Aviatrix. It could be data. It could be, any other like orchestration, containers, ecosystems. I mean, there's a whole plethora of kind of overlay capabilities that customers are going to want to make these multi-cloud environments uniform. And I think AI is going to drive a lot of that, because each of these clouds is going to create very competitive AI services, and customers are going to want to resist lock-in there. They're going to want to shop around. They're going to want to use different components of these different AI capabilities across clouds to leverage different outcomes for their business. So I think in the next 5 years, it's going to be a very exciting time.
Yeah.
One thing is for sure, I think the roles of networking engineers and networking professionals are going to become super critical. If they haven't been critical now, they're going to become even more critical, right? Because it's network or no work. If these clouds aren't connected in a stable, agile way, the whole thing falls apart, right back to the beginning of our discussion.
And it's not only pure networking like routing, it's also the whole security department with firewalls and IDS, IPS, that kind of protection. That also is part of the game.
For sure. Well, we have a lot of exciting work ahead as an industry. Elmar, it's been really fun to have you on the show and take a peek at what's happening with multi-cloud in Europe. I want to thank you for your time and your expertise, and we hope to check in with you soon and see how things are going for you at Aviatrix. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.